on the financial forecast, PERS update, and then the fourth item I'll be talking about in the council is budget direction and study session schedule. So these are all interrelated with one another. Bryce?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this presentation is on the first quarter, fiscal year 19. This is covering the period from July 1 through September 30th of 2018. So just briefly an overview, the revenues and expenditures are performing as expected. Many general fund revenue sources are lagging. That will show in the next slide. One thing just wanted to point out is that the internal service funds, as described in the staff report, are not included as it's funded through expenditures of departments. It essentially would be double counting expenditures. So on the screen is the general fund revenues. You'll notice that's 13% of the annual amount projected, about $7 million. If you'll notice, property tax, sales tax, and our transit occupancy tax, or otherwise known as a hotel tax, are low, but this is typical in the first quarter. Property tax typically lags about 2 months. Transit occupancy tax lags about a quarter, and then property tax comes in different rates from the county through payments from property owners. On the expenditure side, we're about 23.25%, so it's under the 25% evenly distributed average, about $12.6 million. All the departments are at or below that target 25%. So as mentioned, the revenue is a little bit below due to the lag in those three tax categories, and this is typical in the first quarter, but usually balances out over the term of the fiscal year. Expenditures are below the target, and each department is at or below target. Overall, the general fund is performing as projected. On our non-general fund revenues, we're about 23.3%, $12.7 million. You'll notice it varies dramatically between individual funds, but as an aggregate, we are performing just about on target. On the expenditures, we're about 20.3% on expenditures. I just highlighted on the sewer fund, you'll see it a little bit larger than most. There's a $2 million debt service payment in the sewer fund, the full annual amount. So it skews the first quarter report, but as each quarter passes, its impact on that average or on the percentage changes. So again, revenues overall are close to target. The aggregate expenditures are below the target, with the exception of the sewer fund, which again, as we mentioned, skews the first quarter. Gas tax, you also notice revenues are slow coming in, but the appropriations have minimally been used as well. So in conclusion, the general fund is performing as expected, and then the aggregate of all the non-general funds are also doing well. Any funds that are diverge from expectations at the mid-year will be analyzed in further detail for that report. But overall, the first quarter results are typical and appear financially healthy. With that, that completes the presentation, and happy to answer any questions.
Should I bother? You're right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. What happened?
Questions, anybody?
Is there any questions? Thanks, Murray. I didn't mean to throw you for a loop there. Okay, no questions from the council. Is there anybody from the public that wants to speak on this item? Oh my gosh, we got so many people here and nobody wants to speak on this item. Okay. All right, back to council. Any questions? All right, continue, I guess.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We're going to take you through a few slides to talk about the current economic climate, and then we'll finish this part of the presentation with the 10-year financial forecast. And so with that, I'm going to have Bryce do the first part, and then I'll come back and talk to you about the 10-year financial forecast.
So as council is aware, there's 5 main revenue sources that the general fund receives: sales tax, property tax, the hotel tax I mentioned, utility users tax, and business license fees. All these respond typically to economic fluctuations, which is the importance for having this overall economic indicator, overall economic review. And then overall economic indicators are generally positive, with the exception of a few that we'll talk about here shortly. So beginning with some of the indicators, the gross domestic product is is a valuation of all final goods and services produced in a region. It's typically your holistic measure of the economic activity. On the screen, I've identified the national, state, and the Bay Area GDP measures. You'll notice that the 3-year average is 9.35. The further back we include in time, it decreases. So it's showing that the GDP is actually not just growing, but growing a little bit faster in more recent history as it carries up that average. Consumer Price Index, again, change in price over time. That's a good basis for kind of judging sales tax revenue and expenditure inflations that we have. Again, similarly to the GDP, the 3-year average is showing higher rates than whenever we include than the 5-year or the 10-year. So again, showing a good economic growth. Similarly, unemployment, essentially one of the measures of the employment market. We're seeing that the unemployment rate is below the pre-recession levels that we had back in late 2007, 2008. And then you'll notice that the trend is decreasing as we approach 0% unemployment. So the decrease is slowing, but it's still dropping over the term of the review. We don't have the December numbers due to the shutdown. The housing market, this is the one indicator that we're having a little bit of softening in. Home prices fell in 2018, 8% locally by one report. Also, single-family homes production is dropping, which is a highlighted section here. So aside from an increase in 2015, we've had steady decreases between 25 and 30%. And talking to the building department, with the home prices starting to soften, there's an anticipation that some of the developers will try to push in more permits and try to complete more homes, and under fear that the housing market may continue to soften. Tourism, we have had some fluctuations over the past few years, but occupancy down, but our room rental rates are up. So those are increasing steadily, as well as TOT making increases each year. Retail sales increased over the last 8 years. Nationally, the rate of increase is gaining momentum in the last few years on a national level. Local sales tax revenue is also increasing. You'll notice highlighted we have increases in each year. The 2017 decrease is mainly due to the timing of certain payments from now it's CDTFA, essentially what used to be called the Board of Equalization, and then also the end of the triple flip.
Can I ask you a quick question on that?
Sure.
So when you say the retail has increased over the last 8 years, over and over we have discussions about sort of the brick and mortar retail sales that that we're not people are not visiting the outlets as much as, or stores like that as in the past due to online sales. Those numbers there, does that reflect sort of, when we look at overall retail, we're talking about everything online, we're talking about the outlets, everything in general, correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay. So I guess I'm asking, going back to the question about when we say that retail has been increasing every year, does that also include sort of like the outlets and sort of, the actual retail stores that people visit?
Unfortunately, I don't have that level
Okay.
of detail ready
Yeah.
available. I can definitely respond back to Paul.
Just,
Tovar, I can answer that for you at a very high level. And this is the motto that we're hearing from a lot of our colleagues, is that retail isn't going away, it's just changing.
Okay.
So I would tell you without specifics, sure, I think some of our brick and mortar stores have lost sales.
Right.
But we've made up with that through online sales, which the federal government has been able to make some laws recently
Right.
that's enabled us to recoup that. So the makeup here from 2018 to maybe 2012 is completely different,
Right.
but the dollars to us
Still
are better.
Right.
So.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
And just briefly, a slight discussion on a few potential challenges that we have as far as circumstances in the economy. One being the trade war, the so-called, between the U.S. and China, related to international tariffs on goods. We are seeing that is going to drive up costs. Perfect examples are fire department and negotiating with a vendor on a fire engine. The steel tariffs are causing prices and the quotes to basically be a shortened time frame that they usually are, because the prices go up so frequently. It is a volatile situation, but there is a pause that's been placed on it until March as the U.S. and China negotiators try to come to a deal. If that is not achieved, then I think it's a 25% tariff that's being placed, and obviously it becomes a much more volatile situation at that point. Additionally, the government shutdown, which again seems to be changing rapidly, impacts the revenues from federal sources. It impacts the economy through furloughs of federal employees, but also the services they provide, such as farm, payments for farm subsidies, et cetera. So that in fact impacts disposable income, which is where we get our sales tax and tourism dollars. So again, it's been alleviated for temporarily until the 15th potentially, and who knows beyond that. And then third and last is the Federal Reserve interest rates. They're currently 2.5%, considering increasing them to 3% in 2019. So this impacts personal and consumer borrowing as well as bonds.
Okay, so we take all that information that we just gave you and we throw it into a big mixing bowl and we calculate it and we figure out what's going on with the entire financial forecast. As you've just seen, everything looks good, and as finance people, we're not always comfortable with that, how it looks, or because we're kind of born pessimists, I think. So we rely on some outside help. We just don't have enough big enough shop to have our own economic analysis group, but we use the outside consultant who helps us. And we also take a look about what the entire, the economy feels like and what it looks at a statewide and national level. So these assumptions that we've generated, they're all trending upwards. There's really nothing that's scaring us out there. It's just that we just haven't had a recession forever, and that makes us nervous, of course. So you'll see here in the chart that I'm going to go through with you is that our fund balance is going to go up. It's expected to before you've even started your budget and any deliberations and any thoughts that you have about what you'd like to do with that budget. If you didn't do anything, the fund balance would grow, which is a good sign of a healthy economy. We do know, though, that you have seen in almost every presentation we give you is that it's going to decline even if you don't do anything because of our CalPERS contributions. And so we're going to talk about CalPERS a lot, and we're always going to be talking about CalPERS, it feels like. But that is where we haven't done anything. We haven't changed anything in our economy. It's just that the costs are going up for the units of labor that we have. So there's always the two caveats in the model. We have never, and I would never advocate projecting a recession. If I knew when it was coming, I would be able to make some pretty good money off of that. But we'll never do that in our forecast. We won't do that. And then also we don't know what CalPERS is going to do going forward with their discount rate. It is on its way to 7%, which is down from 7.75 several years ago. I'm sure, as you heard, there is some movement towards lowering that further. We don't know about that, so we have not included that in the forecast as well. So this is very similar to what you've seen before, but if you recall a few years ago, the decline was there. It just was not as steep, and the effects of CalPERS have been recalculated. We've had a new actuarial evaluation just performed, and so as you can see at the top, 2020 in your first year of the 2-year budget cycle, it looks pretty good. To continue what you have today, and you would be in deficit spending throughout the next 10 years, and then the two lines, the dotted line is your, I believe, is your 20% reserve level, which you have an adopted policy for, and then the solid line below is the economic reserve that you have as well for 30% total. So really, this is just the snapshot at this date and time. We are going to get into the kind of gritty details as you begin in the budget, but we felt it was important that you knew kind of at a high level, what you're looking at and what you're dealing with in the 10-year financial forecast. As you can see, we just had monumental growth over years, and you just have to ask yourself, how much longer is that going to last? And I wish we knew, but the facts presented to you as they are, the 10-year forecast, it looks pretty good. So when we do start the budget process, you'll see in 2019 and 2020, we're going to project growth. And we have, we always want to make sure we're not whistling past the graveyard. We do look at and see what other people think about this. So we do have advisors out there, FCI, Gluskin Sheff, and PIMCO, who they project it in 2020, 2021, but 3 years ago they projected it this year. So they're not much better at this than we are in the finance department. And then Beacon Economics, which is a main one that a lot of municipalities use, they have no indicators of a recession, which is pretty unusual. Usually any of these folks will tell you, oh, it's coming in a couple of years, but Beacon isn't even touching it right now. So the one area that that we are a little nervous about, but that's not so much a function of the market, or is it just supply and demand, or is the bubble kind of, is it there to the point, is the housing market? And as most cities that have some type of growth limit ordinance or, legislation, that's a kind of a microeconomic, reflection of housing in their area. But we haven't seen anything, houses are still selling for a lot of money. So that's something we'll keep an eye on. One thing Gilroy prides itself on is that they are fiscally conservative and not just in title, in action. This council's been very fiscally conservative, and it's been helpful in mitigating any of those kinds of situations. It gives us time to think, it gives us time to plan, and you have a great reserve policy that enables you to do that. And so in the next year, we expect the reserves to grow a little bit, but again, depending on what you decide as we go through the budget. So that is really a high-level kind of economic outlook we have for you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Council, any questions? Councilman Blankley.
It's not a question, it's just a thing for the public again, because Jimmy knows, again, I emailed him a bunch of questions too about the stuff we're getting into. It's just when you hear staff saying that the forecast looks good, reserves may go up, remember that it's an awful lot like the drug commercials that make sure you're listening to beautiful music and watching gorgeous pictures while they then tell you about all the ways that this drug might kill you. So and we're going to get into that next as the thing that might kill us, because no matter how good these forecasts are, we've got a big looming problem. And for anyone who has credit card debt, that's exactly what it is. You charge something that wasn't so big to start with, but because you can't keep up with that payment, it is growing at a rate that you are never going to meet, no matter how many little things you try to do. So that's the bigger picture. So it's not a pretty one. Okay, thanks.
Okay, council, anything else? No? Is there anybody from the public that wants to speak on the economic climate?
We have Jane Howard. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Since the Mayor was encouraging us to speak, here I am. Yeah. Actually, I just wanted to share that I really appreciate working with Jimmy and Bryce on these economic forecasts, and we work closely in terms of providing data. Just to let Council know, and I actually let our City Administrator know, next week I will be in Los Angeles for the annual Visit California Outlook Forum. This is when we get the projections for Visit California for 2019. We also have all 15 of our international representatives at this one location for the only time of the year, so we can talk to each of them about what they are projecting in terms of international visitation. That's key for us, especially in the Chinese market, because that's our #1 international visitor. I will certainly keep staff informed of anything new that I might glean next week, and we too know we're on borrowed time because we've been going like this the last 7 to 8 years in tourism, and we'll keep you posted though, but just wanted to let you know it's really great to work with the team here and keeping everybody informed about what's current in tourism.
Thank you so much, Jane. Appreciate you being here. Anybody else want to speak on this item? Okay, back to council. Any questions, concerns, nothing like that? Okay, let's move on to the Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS status report.
Okay. Okay, this evening we're going to give you an update on how our